Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. Cherie, thank you for the intro. I'm John Foulkes, Microsoft Business Manager at Softcat. I'm joined by Jack Lewis, who sits within our technical design team as a technical architect, senior technical architect. And we're planning today to run through key themes in terms of cloud and mobility security, so and how that relates to Office 365. So specifically, identity-driven security model that Microsoft uses, sign-on, single sign-on, and management of applications and the devices that are used to access services, Office 365 services and SaaS services. So I'm going to be deferring to Jack to deliver a lot of this. This is the third instalment of a webinar series that Jack and I have delivered. So some of you may have been on our previous two that we've delivered. We are aiming to deliver this in half an hour as scheduled. The previous two, I think, overran a little bit, didn't they, Jack?
They sure did.
Yeah, they did. We still had attendees running up to an hour on the first one, which is a testament to both our customers' patience, I think, but also the fact that these are topical webinars that we're delivering. So without further ado, if I hand over to Jack, and Jack, thank you, welcome, and yeah, if you want to kick off, please over to you.
Brilliant, thanks, John. So we'll start with, John, can you see the slides there? Can you see, am I on the right page? Great stuff. So we'll start with some key concepts. Now, stick with me, please, guys, because some of these do sound a bit salesy, but they are definitely relevant. So these are some of the concepts that I always cover when I go out and speak to customers about cloud and mobility security. So securing access and the data that resides within SaaS applications. So key concepts, let's just run through these very quickly. So SaaS app adoption, the usage has grown rapidly over recent years. So the numbers at Ignite this year suggested that on average there are 17 SaaS apps that are used per user throughout your entire organization. I'm not convinced that it's quite as high as that, but those are the numbers that Microsoft have gathered through some of their partners like Gartner and Forrester. So the organizations that I speak to when they do run SaaS app detection tools certainly don't discover as many as 17, but those are the figures that are being produced by Microsoft. So we've got a lot of SaaS app usage. Maybe not 17, but we've got a lot. And then the other thing as well is that SaaS apps out of the box, because they are delivered outside of your data center, they are potentially accessible by anybody from anywhere on any device, which means that traditional security controls such as firewalls, that sort of thing, are useless to protect you against these SaaS applications. I always say you can't put a firewall around Office 365, and you can't put a firewall around Salesforce. That concept doesn't exist. So we need to secure access into these and the data that resides within them using more modern methods. In order to do that, the first thing that I always recommend organizations do is look into adopting what's called an identity-driven security model, which essentially will protect the keys to the kingdom. The whole idea being that the identity is the new control plane. So we're not going to tie security to a firewall because, again, you can't put a firewall around 365. But we will tie security to the identity. So we'll request additional verification methods, for example, to prove that you are who you say you are. Again, another key concept as well around authentication is it's important to understand the difference between identification and verification. Now, there is a blog that's referenced later on towards the end of the slides that was written by the Microsoft Secure blog team. And it talks about social security numbers, how they aren't really an effective verification method. The difference being that identification should be something that is well known, it isn't a secret, and it's unique to you. Verification should be something that only you have or only you know. And then, again, going back to the social security number reference, because if you're American, you're going to share that social security number potentially with a lot of organizations. It's possibly not the greatest verification method. So again, that difference between identification being an email address, for example, verification being a password, so something only you know. And then again, single sign-on versus password same sign-on. We talk to a lot of organizations that talk about single sign-on and use the terms interchangeably. Single sign-on would be you enter your password once to log onto the device, for example, and then you are never asked for your password or to verify yourself again, potentially, if you access 365 or if you access Salesforce. Password same sign-on would be you log onto your device and then you use the same password to log onto 365, so you are prompted. So both are effective ways of ensuring that your end users don't have to remember multiple credentials, single sign-on being the most the least obtrusive or the least user impactful in terms of providing access into services. And it's what users have become accustomed to in the on-premises world. So they sign into an on-premises domain joined device, they get a Kerberos ticket, and they use that to access applications. For all intents and purposes, they won't be accessed, they won't be asked again to for the username and password, whether it's the same as they use to log on to that computer or not. And then also, the other thing as well that we see is rolling back 2 years. We used to see a lot of point products in the industry. So we used to see an identity access management solution, then we'd see a separate MDM, then we'd see a separate file level protection solution to secure your data with no service integration. What we've seen over the past couple of years is the vendors have brought these together because they've realized that in order to effectively protect access into and the data that resides, you need the identity access solution to talk to the MDM. And they need the identity access management solution to talk to the CASB solution or to talk to the information protection solution. So it's important that if you've got point products, they do integrate and they do share information across the board. So for example, if you are using an identity access management solution, let's say OneLogin, it's important that it's able to talk to your MDM if that's going to be mobile iron to assess whether that device that's being used to access the service is enrolled in your MDM and if it's encrypted. And again, the final one, this is the one that always sounds a little bit salesy, is there is no security without productivity. We always say this because we've seen too often organizations protect access into service using access into services or SaaS apps using verification methods that either obstruct users so that they can't be productive, or they stifle productivity. So, for example, they might not be able to access Office 365 when they're out of the office, or it might be that they've got to do a multi-factor authentication every hour. What we've seen now is that because end users can throw up their own SaaS applications or their own SaaS tenants, they won't do this potentially on purpose. It'll just naturally happen if you don't provide them with the correct tools or the correct services and make it so that they're easy to access. They'll start using unsanctioned IT apps potentially, which is where the shadow IT usage comes from a lot of the time. Again, that results in a loss of control as well. So those are kind of the key concepts. I'm sure we'll come back to this throughout the webinar, but those are always the concepts that I discussed to begin with, particularly with this kind of SaaS app usage world. So just moving forward, let's talk about protecting access into SaaS applications to begin with, because this is always the best place to start. If you control access into the application, you can then do the conditional access bits that state you've got to be on a device that's enrolled and you've got to do a multi-factor auth or whatever it might be. But unless you control access into that, and again, we can't put a firewall around this service, all of our controls can potentially be circumvented by the end user. So adoption steps for an effective, for effectively controlling access into SaaS applications. Step one, you need to reduce the number of credentials that users have to remember or maintain. Because if they have a different username and password for every SaaS application and they're using, say, 10 SaaS applications, they're going to write them down. As human beings, that's what we do. Or they're going to save them in the browser session. Or they're going to do something that impacts security to make their life a little bit easier. So in order to prevent that, what we say is, first of all, you're going to need an identity access management solution, such as Azure AD. Alongside that, in order to reduce the number of credentials that your users have to maintain, it makes sense if you've got an on-premises directory service, such as Active Directory, to implement what's called hybrid AD. So what that will do is it will take a subset of the attributes that are associated with your on-premises identities, groups, and computers and synchronize them up to the identity access management solution. So in the Microsoft world, typically you would use Azure AD Connect to connect to your on-premises Active Directory, and you would synchronize a subset of the attributes to Azure AD. At that point, Microsoft knows about, or the identity access management solution knows enough about your users to make informed decisions. And then once the identity access management solution is in place, the next thing that you need to do is essentially decide how your end users are going to authenticate, because multiple options exist and it depends on your requirements. So what does the risk and compliance team define that you need to do? So we'll talk about that in the next slide. After that is all in place, you would then need to federate your SaaS applications with the identity access management solution. And then you'd be able to disable direct sign-in into the application. So, for example, if you federate Salesforce with Azure AD, it makes sense to disable direct sign-in for your end users into Salesforce, because then they are circumventing the controls. Make them come through the identity access management solution. At that point, if all of your authentications are coming through the identity access management solution, you then have the ability to enforce conditional access. So you can do the must be inside our network. If they aren't inside our network, they've got to do a multi-factor authentication. Must be on a domain joined device. If they're not on a domain joined device, don't allow them to access it. Those sorts of controls. So just moving forward onto the next slide, we spoke about synchronizing identities to the identity access management solution, but then you need to decide how your end user is going to authenticate. Now, in the Microsoft world, you essentially have three options. There is federation, there's password sync, and there is a new option called pass-through authentication. Let's start with federation because it is the most complex. This is what we typically see larger organizations implementing, okay? So federation, the way that it works is you would redirect all authentications from the identity access management solution back to your on-premises federation provider. The great thing about this is you control those authentications on premises using ADFS or some other federation provider. And also you don't have to share your passwords with Microsoft. Because when you synchronize those identities, you can say, don't send a hash of my passwords to Microsoft because I'm going to use federation. So at that point, all of the authentications when you try to authenticate as a federated identity are sent back on premises. The authentications performed using, let's say, ADFS. ADFS then grants a token with some claims inside. Your password is never submitted in those claims. And the token is digitally signed and it's submitted over an encrypted channel, so we all know that it's secure. The downside to that is, although it grants you and you also get true single sign-on as well for domain joined devices, and you get additional control because you've got ADFS. You can write very granular claims rules. And I'm not going to go into too many specific scenarios there, but it does provide you with more control. The downside to this is, because it's an on-premises service, it's very likely that you are going to need to make that site resilient and highly available, because if that service goes down, access and authentication into the SaaS applications, which may still be available, Office 365 may still be available, but your data center might be down, won't be accessible because they have no way of accessing that because it can't be authenticated, and the identity access management solution has no way of authenticating that user. It doesn't know the passwords. There are ways of synchronizing passwords alongside federation so that you can fail back if something goes wrong, but that's probably not going to be desirable if you're going down the federation route. And also it does take time. You know, there's commands that you need to run to enable that. It's not an instant thing. The second option, which we see for smaller organizations or organizations that want to keep things simple, is the password sync option. This will use the synchronization tool, so Azure AD Connect, to synchronize passwords or a hash of the passwords from your on-premises Active Directory to Azure AD. The identity access management solution will then perform the authentication. So you will submit your unique identifiers, your identification, and your verification, which will be your password, to Azure AD. It will then grant you access to services. Great thing about this is you're not going to require that site resilient infrastructure, but you have no single sign-on with this. So your users will always be asked for that username and password, unfortunately, just by the nature of how it works. So they're going to log onto the computer and they're going to open up, they're going to try and access, say, portal.office.com, and they are going to be asked for the same email address and password again. So that's just something to be aware of there. Additionally, you've got to synchronize your passwords with Microsoft. So depending on what the risk and compliance teams state throughout your organization, that might not be, it might not be something that you're able to do, depending on the contracts that you've signed or whatever it might be. And then there's kind of so that's the second option, sorry. And then there is a new option that was recently announced as generally available at Ignite called Pass-Through, which is kind of a hybrid between the two. So don't synchronize your passwords, but the authentications are actually performed at the identity access management layer. So your users would submit their passwords to Azure AD. Those passwords are never held by Microsoft. Instead, your synchronization engine, which would be Azure AD Connect, connects up to Azure AD on a regular basis, collects those usernames and passwords, verifies them against the on-premises Active Directory, and then we'll talk back to Azure AD to say, yes, that's correct, let the end user through. The great thing about this is there is some limited single sign-on capabilities as well. So if end users are trying to access Office in Edge, for example, they won't be asked for username and password. They also won't be asked for username and password when they open up the Office applications as well. It just works. It's as if you've got ADFS for all intents and purposes there. Again, it's a really good way of, although it's still in its infancy, of kind of getting the best of both worlds here. One thing to keep in mind is that you will need, again, some sort of resilience there. Because if your AD Connect goes down, you're going to need another AD Connect sat in another site in order to process those authentications, again, unless you share your passwords with Microsoft and fail back again. So yeah, those are kind of the three options. And this list isn't exhaustive in terms of advantages and drawbacks, but it's kind of the key things. So once, as an organization, you have decided which route you're going to go down, you then have the identity access management solution in place. If we go back to the previous slide, which is step one, synchronize your identities, and then you've decided how you're going to authenticate. The final step would be federating your SaaS applications, disabling the direct sign into, say, Salesforce, so that you've got to come through like the identity access management solution, and then writing the conditional access rules. Just before we move on, though, I just want to kind of, we'll send these across. There's a lot of diagrams that we're going to display during this 30-minute session. Again, I don't expect anybody to consume these right now, but these are included in the slides that we'll send across for you to consume in your own time. These are sample hybrid AD infrastructures. The key thing here being the difference between federation, if you look at the infrastructure that's required, and password sync / pass-through. The infrastructure requirements are a lot less. So it's just something to keep in mind there. And again, these are samples, so these might vary based on your individual needs. But it's just something that we wanted to include just to show you kind of sample setups, sample infrastructure requirements, how you make it site resilient and highly available if you've got federation, and then also what happens on a kind of on a step-by-step basis. So we'll leave you to consume those in your own time if that's okay, guys. Because we've only got 30 minutes and we've got to kind of jump through this as quickly as possible. So any questions there, John?
No, not from me. I think that was clear. I don't think we've got any questions arising in the chat window. If anyone does, please do. We're happy to take questions through the chat window at any time. Don't have to wait till the end of the half hour. So if people have, please fire away.
Brilliant. So at that point, we've got a hybrid AD set up. Again, you've got your options. You've synchronized your subset of your attributes. End users have a single password, username and password that they've got to remember. Sometimes they don't even see a prompt if you've got federation or pass-through. So at that point, we've got a good end user experience, not having to remember multiple passwords. As I've said, that's the key thing here. They're not going to write them down. The next step is to identify which SaaS applications are being used throughout your organization and then bringing them under control. Because these controls aren't just here to protect Office 365. They're here to protect any SaaS application which supports claims-based authentication and can be federated with your identity access management solution. So, just looking through this, if we look at the step 3 thing, the first thing to do is to federate those SaaS applications. Now, I always say difficulty will vary on an app-by-app basis. So, for example, let's use Concur, which a lot of organizations use to manage their expenses. Concur is a flagship application. It is relatively straightforward to integrate with Azure AD. It'll also be relatively straightforward to integrate with Okta and all of the rest of the identity access management solutions. But they will charge you for the privilege. So this is another thing to keep in mind as well. Some applications will charge you a one-off fee, or they might say you've got to uplift your license in order to support federated single sign-on. So it's just something to be aware of, guys. And again, this will vary on an app-by-app basis. Other apps that we've done in the past have been very difficult to federate, even though they support it. And also the home realm discovery might be poor as well. So at the moment, if you've got a lot of users that are going directly to the SaaS application to authenticate, depending on how the home realm discovery of that application is set up, it might be that you need to communicate to your users that they won't be able to go directly to the SaaS application anymore. They will need to come through the My Apps portal, which is this kind of thing, which we'll cover in a second. But again, it varies on an app-by-app basis. What we've seen over the last 2 years is that support for this kind of thing has grown rapidly because SaaS applications have realized that IT departments want to bring this stuff back under control, and they want to provide a better experience to their end users. So it's secure end user enablement scenarios. So again, to vary on an app-by-app basis, I would encourage you to communicate with your account managers at the app vendors just to make sure that they do support this. And if they don't, get something logged in user voice to say, this is what we want, or this is what we need. In terms of federating, again, there's going to be some metadata shared between the app and your identity access management provider or a certificate change. Once that's completed, you're then going to need to set up Azure AD to provide the correct type of claims. Again, that'll vary on an app-by-app basis. Some apps, they'll just work out the box. Others will be more difficult. Once the apps are federated, though, and you've disabled direct signing for the end user, they will appear in, if you use Azure AD, the My Apps portal, which is the top thing here. So we use this at Softcat. I log into the My Apps portal every day. It's one of the first things I do. And we've got 70 or 80 applications listed here at Softcat. I sign in once to the My Apps portal, or if I'm on a domain joined machine, I just simply go to myapps.microsoft.com and it signs me directly in. Once I'm in, I simply click on an app and it allows me straight through. It doesn't ask me for username and password again. I get single sign-on into that application. Secondly, if we just go back to the previous slide, the next thing that we wanted to do once we disabled direct sign-in was enable conditional access, because this gives us the control over the verification option. So prove that you are who you say you are. Usernames and passwords we've seen over the past years are not an effective verification method. Credential theft is everywhere. Users write passwords down. So it might be desirable if you've got information in a SaaS application to enable additional verification methods, whether they're in the office, outside the office. Conditional access gives you that control. So as an example, at Softcat, if I am in the office, I do not have to do a multi-factor authentication when I try and access Salesforce. But when I'm out of the office, I have to be on an MDM enrolled device that has encryption turned on, and I have to do a multi-factor authentication, as well as entering my username and password. That is because Salesforce contains potentially sensitive information. There are other controls that we implement as well, which I'll touch on in the future. But conditional access provides you with that granular control where you can say, because you're not allowed to directly sign into the app anymore, we can say that you have to jump through these hoops before you are allowed to access the application. And again, I've taken a screenshot of the user experience. At the bottom, that is the customized MFA verification code screen. So when I try and access an application that requires me to do an MFA, it will look at the claims and say, Jack has only authenticated using username and password. So therefore, we need him to do a multi-factor auth. Once I've done a multi-factor auth, the token that I use will be updated to say that I've done one. So if I try and access another multi-factor authentication secured application, it won't ask me again. Again, you guys have full control over that. That is a Softcat configuration setting for usability purposes. We think that, or we know that, if you ask for multi-factor auths all the time, that will hinder end user productivity. It's a very kind of, I would call it a first world problem, but there is something called MFA fatigue, where if you ask for multi-factor auths all the time, your users will be frustrated. We're starting to see this now throughout customers that have implemented these controls and have set short lifespan timelines on the access tokens. Again, there are potentially better ways that you can do that, so we'll move on to that in a second. But just going back to that, so we'll go back to the first, kind of the first steps of securing access into SaaS applications. Step 1, implement hybrid AD. Step 2, decide how you're going to authenticate. Step 3, federate the SaaS apps, disable the direct sign-in if the app supports it. Again, if they don't, make sure you speak to your account manager and request that feature. And then finally, enforce the conditional access controls on an app-by-app basis. So again, we've got sensitive data in Salesforce, but we don't have sensitive data in, say, another application that we use called Envoy. So I don't have to do a multi-factor auth if I just want to access Envoy, because there is no desire for our security department to secure it in that way. So why hinder the end user productivity?
Jack, we've got a question in the chat window from Robert. Can you see that question?
Let me have a look. Okay. So let me just have a quick look. So I can see some questions from Alex. I can't see anything from Robert, unfortunately.
Oh, right. Okay. So let me read that out. So Robert asks, if you turn off direct login to SaaS apps, can ADFS/Intune still allow non-domain joined but enrolled devices, such as iPads and iPhones, access to the SaaS apps? How does that work? Yeah.
So these are the conditional access controls, guys. So it's completely up to you what you want to enforce. You might say that if you've got access to a SaaS application, if you've done a multi-factor auth, we don't care about the device itself. So therefore, the only verification option that you need to do when you're outside of the office, if you disable direct sign-in, is just do an MFA. Or it could be no security controls. The granular level of control is completely up to you. And these can be and or rules. So you could also state that they either have to do a multi-factor auth or they have to be on the domain joined device. It could be one or the other, guys. It's completely up to you. So yes, you have granular control over whether they're allowed to access these apps on a non-domain joined device or only on a domain joined device. And if they're not on a domain joined device, you might ask for an additional verification option. Again, it's completely up to you guys. These are enforced at the conditional access level. Cool.
Yeah, good.
So let's move on, because I'm determined to finish this within 30 minutes. Again, I would never expect anybody to consume this within the 30-minute window, so we will send these out to everybody. What this displays is exactly what happens when an end user accesses an application if you enable federation. So it talks about the granular steps that actually happen in the back end and what the end user sees. We'll completely send these. Very generic. This is typically what happens if you enable things like multi-factor authentication, device-based conditional access. The next step shows you what happens if you do the authentication at the identity access management layer, but don't have conditional access turned on. Again, I'd encourage you to consume these in your own time. And if you've got any questions, feel free to get in touch. Okay, so we've talked about access into the applications, but what about the data that resides within them? So because that data resides in a SaaS application, a lot of organizations feel that they've lost control of that data. It's left the boundaries of their file servers or their data centers. So what solutions we typically recommend organizations put in place is data classification and file level protection. File level protection will protect the data if it's sensitive, regardless of where it resides, because it encrypts the file. So it does file level encryption and applies rights to the file. So again, talking specifically about Microsoft products, there is an offering called Azure Information Protection, which is part of Enterprise Mobility and Security, which, number one, if you look at the bottom of the screen here where we talk about user experience, encourages your users to classify data. So when they're in the Office apps, there's an add-in that you can deploy. They will then be asked to classify that data. Once that data is classified, you can use Azure RMS to encrypt the file and apply rights to it. That file can then only be consumed by an RMS enlightened application. So for example, I could create a document and I could say that only John and myself are able to open that document. I'm able to do whatever I want with that document because I'm the owner, but John is only able to open it. He can't copy and paste, he can't print it. I would then save that document. It would be encrypted. It would have RMS applied to it. If that document then gets stored on a USB key, and Cherie in the marketing department finds the USB key and she plugs it in and she opens it using an Office application, the first thing that she will be asked to do is authenticate. Upon authenticating, it will realize that Cherie is not on the list of allowed users, and it will simply just not allow access to that document. If they open it using, I don't know, a text editor, it would just be a load of encrypted nonsense because it is encrypted using AES. I think it's 150, not 250. So if you use Word documents, it isn't 256-bit encrypted, but there is a lower level of encryption it supports because it has to work with Office 2010 at the moment. I think it's 128-bit encryption. So that's just something to be aware of, guys. Again, if you need some more information on this, we can send it through. But that's, again, to support Office 2010. When Office 2010 goes end of support, all Azure Information Protection and RMS encrypted documents will be 256-bit. In terms of how this works in the SaaS world, because that data is classified and because it's encrypted, it doesn't matter where it resides. It's a really effective way of actually storing sensitive data in SaaS applications and still retaining control. At that point, your users can still access it, provided they jump through the hoops that you have put in place for the access control, and they can still access the document provided they authenticate when they open it up in Office. They can also then, you can restrict the ability to print it. And as I've said, it's really graceful from an end user experience perspective because there is a bar at the top of Outlook that they're asked to classify documents with. Depending on the licensing that you purchase, you can also automate that classification and the protection. It depends whether you purchase P1 or P2. P1 is included in EMNS E3, P2 is included in EMNS E5. And I do always say that it's a very difficult technology to try and explain. I've tried my hardest here, guys. But a demonstration certainly will provide more context around the usage scenarios of this. It also works really well with emails as well. There's a built-in protection template that is called Do Not Forward. So if you put anybody in the to and CC, you click Do Not Forward, and it will actively look at the to and CC list and just allow them to consume the email, and reply to the email, but it won't allow them to forward it or copy and paste the data outside of it. So it's a really effective way of sharing data internally and externally. So it uses Azure B2B as well. So if an organization is using Office 365, you can very simply share securely the information, a Word document or an email with that organization. They'll just be asked to authenticate and then their name will be on the list. They'll be able to access that. Again, a really effective way of applying file level protection to the data that resides in these SaaS applications. John, that all right? You're right to move on to the last slide here?
Yeah, very, very good, Jack. Very good, thorough. Yeah, but I think move on.
Yeah, and apologies, guys. I know I'm going fast here, but I'm determined to stick to 30 minutes, and I'm now at 32. So very quickly, the advanced security piece. So we've talked about MFA fatigue, and we've talked about applying unintelligent verification methods. So the fact that you've got to be on a domain joined device, so you've got to do a multi-factor auth. It's a little bit crude, but it works, guys. You know, there's no arguing with that. You know, username, password, and an MFA is a very effective way of providing those verification options. The problem that we tend to see is organizations get a lot of complaints from their end users because what you'll tend to find is that they'll be asked for an MFA when they open Outlook, they'll be asked for an MFA when they try and access an application that's secured in My Apps, they'll have to do an MFA when they're on their phone, and very quickly the MFAs that they're being asked to do can ramp up depending on how you configure the token lifespan. So there is a better way. It does require an uplift on the licensing though, so you would need to purchase Azure AD Premium P2. There's something called risk-based conditional access. I always describe this as the feather in Microsoft's cap. And this is good because it's very unique to Microsoft because they are one of the largest identity providers in the world. So Microsoft use the access information from 13 billion authentication and access requests that they see daily throughout Azure AD. And throughout the other SaaS applications that they control authentication into. So think Hotmail, for example, or MSN. They then feed that data into the intelligent security graph. Alongside that, they also feed in data from the digital crimes unit. So the digital crimes unit at Microsoft will track malicious IP ranges, stolen credentials. They will also track malware-infected devices. Again, and they will feed that data into the intelligent security graph. Information about your usage on an individual level, so this is tied to individual profile usage, is also fed into the intelligent security graph. Microsoft will then use that information to associate a risk to your individual identities. What you can do is you can state that it will learn what is normal usage behavior for John, for example. So it will learn that John logs in from Marlow and he logs in from Reading and he logs in from the Manchester and Glasgow office on a regular basis. Under normal usage, it will never ask John for a multi-factor authentication. It will only ask John for additional verification options if the risk that's associated with John's identity raises from, say, low to medium. And again, this is fully configurable by yourself. What that will do is it will use the data in the intelligent security graph, so the big data analysis that Microsoft's doing, the machine learning algorithms to kind of predict whether something is out of the ordinary or whether it's not right. And if something out of the ordinary happens, so for example, John logs in from London and then 4 hours later he logs in from Manchester, but not the Softcat office. It's physically possible to travel from London to Manchester in 4 hours, but we've never seen John log in from that IP address before. So therefore, it's a little bit risky. So we'll ask John to do a multi-factor authentication, just that one time. At that point, John does the multi-factor auth, and it lowers the risk that's associated with the identity back down to low, which is great. Again, if John does an authentication from London and then 3 seconds later he logs in from Dubai, it's physically impossible to travel to Dubai in 3 seconds. So it's very likely that John's credentials have been stolen. So therefore, it will raise the risk to high. It'll block access to the account. It'll send an email to one of the IT administrators, and it will make John reset his password. This is a very effective way of preventing MFA fatigue, tying in some intelligence into the authentication flow, so that you are better, using that information that Microsoft have got, which is wholly unique to them, to better protect your users. And again, this is great for high-risk, high-value users. And you can purchase it for a subset of your organization as well. You don't have to purchase it for everybody. Alongside that, there are also CASB solutions. Microsoft have Cloud App Security, which they've been driving a lot of innovation over the past 12 months. These provide visibility into the SaaS app usage throughout your entire organization. So you feed in the logs from your firewalls or your edge devices to Cloud App Security. It will then monitor the usage, report on any kind of risky usage, report on any policy alerts, and it will also now integrate with conditional access. So for example, if you have federated with Salesforce and you want to provide access into Salesforce from non-domain joined or non-MDM enrolled machines, but you want to make sure that they can only do certain things, Cloud App Security alongside Azure AD can enforce that. Because what it will do is it will proxy the connection via Cloud App Security. And if, for example, John starts to download a load of Azure Information Protection classified documents on a non-domain joined device, it will cut the connection. So again, we go back to the fact that point solutions are great if they can integrate, but the EM&S are all built by Microsoft and they all integrate into the intelligent security graph, so that's how they all communicate with each other. They are then actively able to protect you against the, they will talk across the various security solutions to allow your end users to access these services until they get to a certain point where it's then unacceptable, and then it will cut the connection. So that's a really, really, really graceful end user enablement scenario where you can say, look, you can still get access to Salesforce, you can't start downloading a load of classified documents on that device. Anything to add there, John, on the licensing side of things, or do you want me to kind of skip through the next two things?
Nothing to add that you haven't already covered. Obviously, there is
cool.
P2 dependency there in terms of information protection, but no, crack on by all means.
Yeah. So again, EM&S E5 would give you Azure Information Protection P2, which is the automated classification of the documents and the protection, and Azure AD Premium P2. That will give you the risk-based conditional access stuff. Very quickly, Microsoft Password Guidance, which is referenced in the next slide on one of the links. I would encourage all organizations that are using SaaS applications to read through this. It was produced last year, and it just provides insight into how over the last 15 years as IT departments, what we have done to ensure end user passwords are kept secure has actually resulted in the exact opposite happening. So we've forced users to reset the password every 60 days. We do certain things like making them have an exclamation mark or a password with a capital letter and a number. What the research found is that this is actually counterproductive and actually results in poor password management and poor password hygiene. Instead, a more effective way is to use risk-based conditional access, multi-factor auth, single sign-on, and actually throw a lot of the things that we've used in the past in the bin, essentially. So it's definitely worth a read. It does require you to do certain things, but it's quite an eye-opening read if you haven't had time to consume anything like that in the past. And then there's also Windows Hello for Business, which I'm not going to talk about in great detail here, but this is think of Windows Hello for Business as the framework to enable biometric authentications or multi-factor authentications into your Windows device, so that you can increase the security during the authentication. Again, this is a great way of tying additional verification options or verification methods into the sign-in. And end users think it's really cool, let's be honest. If you sign in with your face, for example, that's a really cool end user enablement scenario, and it's very secure, using strong authentication then. And we can still provide single sign-in into a lot of apps. It's not going to submit your face to Azure AD, that's not how it works. Windows Hello for Business will enable the biometric authentications, and then the device will use a private key that's stored in the TPM to do asymmetric authentication with the identity provider. But again, there are some things in the next slide which I'm going to show now, which I'd encourage you guys to go out there and read. One of them is a video that was released yesterday about some updates to Windows Hello for Business, which is the 4th article down, and the 5th article down actually talks about how Microsoft implemented Windows Hello for Business. So yeah, just to kind of wrap things up there, guys. Again, I know I'm 10 minutes over, so I'm going to get a kick in from the marketing department. Securing access into SaaS applications does require some work. So you're going to need to implement identity access management. You're going to need to choose how you're going to authenticate. You're going to need to federate your apps, disable direct sign-in, then implement conditional access controls. To secure the data, look at Azure Information Protection as a data classification and file-level protection solution. If you're looking to identify shadow IT usage and implement intelligence into the authentication flows, look at Azure Identity Protection, CASB solutions, Windows Hello for Business, and then go and review that Microsoft password guidance article, because as I've said, they process a lot of authentication, so they're in a very unique position to be able to provide guidance and protection.
Very good, Jack. Very good. Yeah.
Brilliant. I hope that was okay, guys. I know I've gone quick, and I am very northern, so I tend to get very quick, but hopefully there'll be some kind of translator on the replay.
Well, what I would say to the audience, and thank you, Jack. That was really good run through. If anybody has specific follow-ups they want to pursue, please do come to us through the normal channels. If you contact via your Softcat account manager, certainly Jack and I would be very happy to look at specific scenarios that individual customers have, whether that's technical aspects or licensing aspects. Between us, we're very happy to look at those specific cases if anyone wants to.
Yeah, there's just been a question in the chat about the unreversible hashes. I think the thing to keep in mind here, guys, is that Microsoft, if you do password sync, you are submitting your passwords to Microsoft, so they need to be able to unhash that password or do something else in order to make sure that your password matches the password that's been synchronized with it. We saw breach at one login actually, which was an identity access management solution where they had hashed passwords, but potentially they were reversible. I would not believe the marketing hype if they say that they are unreversible, because at the end of the day, you are sharing your passwords, whether they're hashed or not. So they need to be able to match your password to their password. So somewhere along the line, there is a mathematical sum that enables them to reverse that.
Okay, I think that's all questions answered, unless there's any other questions arising.
I think we're all good, but yeah, thanks for joining, everybody.